Book 3, New Amsterdam, New York, New Babylon Falls. 24. Friday, March 31, 2012. Quatrains from Nostradamus haunted LP. He couldn't get those words out of his head. It was bad enough with his view to the future described by Bible prophecies and the I Ching. However, now the Mayan long count calendar, which said the world would end on the 21st of December 2012, played on his mind. LP struggled to come to terms with all that had happened over the past 4 decades, which culminated in saving the scroll in cyberspace. He wanted nothing more to do with it. As far as he was concerned, he and his mates carried out what was foretold at the ancient Aboriginal site in the outback, 1,000 clicks west of Brisbane in Queensland. He only wanted to get his life back to normal, spend time with his family, and finish a project he was working on that would put him in a position to retire early and do the things he loved. Go fishing and camping, spend more time with his family, and travel around the world. With the global financial crisis still affecting retirement funds, however, his retirement plans were on hold unless he could get a windfall like what happened back in 2003. He had an uncanny ability of reading the future, which he put down to being born according to the Chinese horoscope in the year of the snake. He now understood how to use this gift of foresight, which had then netted him $100,000. That windfall went into renovating their rundown old home. He tried to warn friends and relatives about the looming global financial crisis back then, but some declared he was crazy, and others were dismissive of his prediction of the financial upheaval. However, acting alone on his hunch, he changed his retirement fund to a conservative investment mix, 6 months before the first crisis struck in September 2008. Around the world, stock markets went into a tailspin. Fortunately, his retirement fund was not significantly impacted, continuing to produce returns of 5 to 9% each year. Still, this good luck would count for nothing if he could not shake off the feeling that there was one more thing left to be done with the scroll, even though he didn't have it anymore. What he did have was a ghostly image within the scroll, which could be printed out on canvas with his colour copier. Connecting with the image, which he named Zero, and whispering George's mantra instantly transported him to a higher level of thought. This, coupled with his gift of foresight, tapped him into visions of the future, helping him avoid disaster and benefit financially by gaining deep insight on what to invest in and when. He had to make up his mind one way or the other to follow through on the vision. After those thoughts dogged him for months, he decided to visit New York City. Exactly what he was going to do. It was not clear yet, but one reason for going to Manhattan was meeting with publishers about future book releases. He was not going to mention any other reason for wanting to be in New York to anyone. The real reason was, he believed, he was the one mentioned in Nostradamus' writings, foretelling of a man travelling from the east and entering the new city of Babylon. The description fitted LP, now aged, bald, a mark on his face, and a gap between teeth. Decision day arrived, marking the 10th anniversary of 9/11. In his line of business, 3/4 of the selling season for promotional calendars passed with incentives for introducing new clients to the benefits of the company's products. Prize, an all-expense-paid trip to a conference in Las Vegas, with plenty of time for sightseeing. The timing of the conference was yet to be announced, but it was expected to be held before the end of June 2012. LP needed to write up as many new orders in 3 months as he had done in the earlier part of the year. This was a big call, but he knew that if he won, he could leapfrog from the east coast of Australia to the west coast of America. All passengers, please proceed to boarding gate 52. Flight 7 for Los Angeles now boarding. The voice of a flight attendant boomed. LP turned to Ingrid and said, "I didn't think we'd make it 6 months ago." Surprise, he'd achieved his sales target with 1 day to spare and didn't learn that he qualified for the conference until December. Ingrid responded, "Banish all thoughts of work. We're having a holiday, and if we don't catch up with anyone from your office in Vegas, that would be great." "We can't be rude," LP said. "There's the company dinner and a show already booked, plus the sales meeting. Other than that, we have time to do what we want and when we want." He smiled, hiding his true intentions after leaving Vegas. Their chat got interrupted by LP's mobile phone, which vibrated in his jeans pocket. He reached down and flicked it open. It was Rick, the company CEO, calling from Sydney Airport, asking if everything was fine with them and if they were on time to connect with their flight to LA. LP would be the only company person on Flight 7. Everyone else was flying out from Sydney Airport. "See you in Vegas," was LP's last comment to Rick before Flicking closed his phone and slipping it back into his pocket. LP and Ingrid lined up to board and slowly walked to the final check-in counter. They presented their boarding passes and proceeded down the long walkway before entering the plane. Welcomed by two Virgin Airline hostesses, they were directed down the aisle for sitting. LP thought, "This is good, 2 seats back from the toilet with an aisle seat, you beauty." That meant he had more leg room and wouldn't feel cramped in. Plus he could have a couple of beers and not be climbing over passengers to go for a wee walk. However, things did not go to plan. He had worried about bad weather and a rough flight, but he had no idea he would have an altercation with a fellow passenger. He hadn't even mentioned his fears of bad weather to Ingrid, not wanting to worry her unnecessarily. 2 hours out from Brisbane, the captain announced, "Passengers and all crew, be seated and fasten your seatbelts." As the warning light above came on to buckle up, the captain continued, "All flights to Nadi, Fiji have been cancelled due to bad weather, and we are now changing course. Heading north to skirt the storm. There could be some turbulence, so please remain seated until the seatbelt lights go off." Well, it was no more beer for LP for a while, so he settled back to watch a movie on the backseat screen. Before the seatbelt lights went on, LP looked over to the main screen, plotting the course travelled. They were 9 hours and 35 minutes from landing at LA Airport, flying at an altitude of 30,998 feet and travelling at 937 miles per hour. Ingrid nudged LP, pointed to the toilet and whispered, "Got to go." He stood up to let her pass and sat back down. There were two ladies waiting to use the restroom, just 2 seats forward of where they were seated. So Ingrid walked across and passed 3 passengers in the centre row in front of the toilets and waited on the opposite side for the restroom sign to light up. LP didn't sit down for long. Knocking down the last mouthful of beer, he then followed Ingrid, stepping around 3 sets of legs, and waited behind her for the toilet to get vacant. When the next passenger exited the toilet, she went back the same way Ingrid came and was about to step around a set of outstretched legs. Of course, common courtesy would allow her to pass when those seated would move their legs if they were blocking the passageway. But the man seated on the far aisle seat had moved his feet up and placed them against the back toilet wall, thus creating a barrier. The passenger, a woman in her mid-50s, looked down at the guy. He just ignored her and didn't speak. She turned around and walked up the aisle to the back of the plane and back down to where she was sitting 1 row back from LP and Ingrid. As Ingrid entered the small restroom, LP commented, "He's a smart ass, but you better not try that on me." "Settle," Ingrid retorted, "or security will be escorting you off this flight as we land." "I'm not about to make a scene, just hurry up. I'm busting," he replied. Ingrid didn't take long and proceeded to walk back the way she came. But again, this guy, who looked like he could be part of the Japanese mafia, with long black hair and olive complexion, appeared cross and a trifle intimidating. His legs were pushed hard against the wall. Ingrid indicated she wanted to pass, and again he ignored any request to put his feet down. The guy was undoubtedly acting like a petulant child. This was his space, and he was going to control and defend it. Ingrid turned around, so as not to create an incident, and walked up the aisle and back down to their seat. LP entered the toilet, thinking, "That arsehole isn't going to do that to me." When he was done, he slid open the door and walked past 2 passengers without any conflict. Standing before a barrier, the 2 legs presented an obstacle. Overhead, the fasten seatbelt sign was on, and LP wanted to sit down quick smart. He looked at the guy straight in the eye and said, "Either you move your legs, or I'm coming through them." There was a moment's dead silence as they eyeballed each other. LP glanced over to Ingrid, who was shaking her head, and then raised his right leg and stepped over the man-made barrier. A few expletives were exchanged, but it didn't come to blows. LP sat down next to Ingrid and said, "Just as well he didn't jump up, or I would have laid one on him." "Settle, settle," she said in a soft whisper, "or we won't make it to Vegas." He pushed his seat back, placed his headphones on, and started watching a movie to take his mind off the altercation, which could have ended his mission to reach New York by Good Friday. Almost 2 hours had passed since the cabin lights were dimmed. The cabin crew was seated, and except for a baby crying, the only noise that could be heard was the dull roar of the aero engines. Some turbulence could be felt as the plane skirted around the storm ahead. The pilot fiddled with the scheduled flight path on the overhead video screen. He had changed course, heading north for about an hour. Then LP felt the plane changing direction again, now heading in the southeasterly direction. Passengers were able to keep track of the altitude, the speed, and the number of hours it took them before landing at LA International. The pilot made up for the time lost from diverting off course, eventually putting him only 20 minutes behind schedule. Ingrid and LP were the first to stand up after the seatbelt sign went off. He needed to stretch his legs, and she was busting to use the restroom again, while Ingrid rushed forward to beat everyone to the toilet. On their aisle side, 2 seats forward, not create another incident as earlier. LP reached up and opened the overhead luggage compartment, pulling down their carry-on luggage. He shuffled along with the other passengers and met up with Ingrid, who then helped him wheel their belongings off the plane. It had been a long flight. Although the plane had departed Brisbane Airport at 11:20 a.m, March 30, they touched down in LA at 7:20 a.m. the same day, albeit different time zones. They had little sleep throughout the flight, but the excitement and adrenaline kept them wide-eyed and keen to connect with their flight to Las Vegas. LP's colleagues going to the conference wouldn't be hard to spot. Just find a bar in the airport, and he was pretty sure that's where he'd catch up with them. Ingrid and LP collected their luggage from the carousel and headed towards customs and border security. American airports had taken airline safety to a level not experienced in Australia, even 10 years after 9/11. The fear of hijacking still presented a clear and potent danger to Americans. LP passed all the checkpoints. After his hand luggage and bags were scanned, his pockets emptied, his shoes and jeans belt removed, he entered the full-body scanner. He was called forward and asked to follow the security officer for further scanning. LP called out to Ingrid, "I'm over here. Just got to go with this security guy. I won't be long." She looked concerned, thinking, what has he done now to bring such attention to himself? The security officer escorted him behind a partition and asked, "This is a random check for explosives residue. Have you been in contact with explosive materials?" Surprised, LP answered, "No." "What is your reason for entering America?" "Holidays, and to attend a conference in Vegas," he replied. "Well, you're clean to go have fun in Vegas," said the officer. LP walked around the partition, grabbed Ingrid's hand, and said, "Let's get out of here before they find something else to hold us up." The airport's main terminal was like entering a massive shopping mall, dotted with eateries, bars, newsstands, and souvenir shops. LP spotted one of his colleagues and waved to Trev, who had only recently retired as company sales director, but wanted to go to one last conference. He had initiated the first one when he started with the company about 27 years ago. "G'day, mate. See you made it on time to connect with a flight to Vegas," Trev said. "Yeah, only had 2 problems that could have put a stop to that," LP replied. "What's that, mate?" asked Trev. "I'll tell you over a beer when we get to Vegas," LP said. Now there was 11 accounted for. Another 8 delegates would arrive from Sydney flying Qantas, arriving at 2 o'clock. They would catch up with them at Planet Hollywood, where they were all staying. Trev, always the leader, led the way to the transit terminal. He had been here many times before. They entered a corridor and went down a flight of stairs opening out onto a large platform. Here they would wait for a light rail commuter train. 5 minutes later, the train arrived and they got on board with their entire luggage. They were shuttled to their next departure area. When the commuter train stopped, Trev was first off, waving his hand in one direction and quipping, "More security checkpoints. Follow me and it won't be long before we land in Las Vegas." The LA domestic terminal had the same security procedures, and all their luggage went through the security checks once again. Despite the delay, they were on schedule to board Delta Flight 201 to Vegas at 11 o'clock. Looking out through the large glass window, LP commented to the group, "We couldn't wish for better weather. Blue sky and hardly a cloud in sight. This is going to be a smooth flight, great for sightseeing." What they hadn't expected was the small size of their aircraft. As they walked across the tarmac, LP saw it was just a 50-seater commuter plane, an overbooked one at that. Whoever arrived last would miss this flight. Trev's group was lucky. Seat allocations were done earlier, and everyone boarded together. LP ducked his head as he entered the plane. There was only one stewardess, who pointed to the rear end of the plane for him to be seated. LP leaned over as he walked up the aisle to avoid hitting his head. This was the smallest plane he had ever flown in, other than his helicopter flight on New Zealand's South Island. He wondered if this plane would fly any higher than that. Their only stewardess was multitask. She welcomed everyone aboard, shut the plane door, checked that all seatbelts were fastened, and demonstrated the safety instructions for an emergency. When all was ready for takeoff, the pilot said, "This is Captain Roger Smith. Perfect weather conditions ahead, ideal for viewing the snow-capped mountain ranges to the south. We will be arriving in Las Vegas a few minutes ahead of schedule, so I'll circle the city once for passengers to snap some aerial shots before landing." After an uneventful flight, with no passengers giving LP any reason to get stirred up, he was pretty relaxed. He turned to Ingrid and said, When we've booked in, let's check out what this town's like during the day. Ingrid looked like a concerned parent as she said, "You might be looking for excitement in Vegas, but what you are really saying is you want to gamble. Think about it. We have had no sleep for nearly 36 hours. Stop and have a rest for an hour or two." "I don't think I can. This is such an adrenaline rush," he replied. "We'll talk about this later, after we get to Planet Hollywood." When they all walked out from the terminal, they were greeted by a cold nip in the air and two limos waiting to take them to their hotel. Driving through traffic was not dissimilar to commuting in any Australian city. It was like surfers' paradise in Queensland, which followed the coastline from Southport to the border, dotting the skyline with high-rise buildings, but with just one casino to indulge LP's appetite to gamble. And the city was also nicknamed the Strip. Driving down the Vegas Strip, the limo driver dodged in and out of the congested traffic lanes, ignoring the blaring horns of the other drivers. LP looked past the casino buildings and saw a clear blue sky without a cloud in sight. What a contrast to the chaos on the street and sidewalks as partygoers got an early start to the nightlife. Planet Hollywood was only one set of traffic lights away. The driver hit the accelerator, just beating a red light, and turned down a side street, entering a basement drop-off area. They all chipped in and gave the driver a $30 tip. Then they grabbed their bags. To their surprise, the ones that had been roped down in the boot were already waiting to be lugged away. LP was the first to line up to check in, while Ingrid went to the restroom to freshen up. She needed a toilet urgently. LP waited in the line for almost 20 minutes and then got their keys to room 1883. They headed over to the lift area, pulling their carry-on luggage past rows of poker machines. LP could see these were not like the ones in Australia. Looking across the pathway, he spotted the casino tables, and his heart started to beat a little faster. He also got goosebumps from the sound of slots calling out to him to play. "Don't get any ideas about gambling until we unpack and do the tourist thing," Ingrid said. "We're going to walk through some of the other casinos before you feed any of those one-armed bandits." As far as LP was concerned, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to experience Vegas, both the good and the bad. He couldn't pass up the opportunity to play machines he'd never seen before. 7 days in Vegas would indulge his senses to gamble and drink anytime, anywhere. He could even walk into a casino with a cold beer in hand, without having to dump it in a trash can. Ingrid looked out the window of their 18th floor room, which was filled with Hollywood memorabilia, and remarked, "That's the Bellagio across the road. We're going in there first." "Yeah, sure, but what do you think of the Marilyn Monroe photo under the glass coffee table?" "It reminds me of my younger days," she replied. "Whatever you reckon, I'm picking up a 6-pack of Bud and some snack food to munch on later," LP countered. "Okay, let's get out of here," she gave in, smiling. They entered the lift foyer. LP pressed the down button and waited. With a ding, the lift doors opened. Seconds later, they were walking through the casino, once again flanked by rows of poker machines. Ingrid kept a watchful eye on LP. She wanted him to pay attention to what she wanted to do in Vegas shop. There was going to be a conflict of interest, no matter what LP said. Eventually, he would have to do what Ingrid asked for. Later, he would have permission to indulge himself. They walked to a nearby mall, turning left onto the Strip. A burly African-American caught LP's eye and said, "Hi, would you like free tickets to a show and $200 poker money?" "What's the catch?" LP replied. The man directed Ingrid and LP over to a kiosk in front of the main entrance to a casino. There, they were introduced to Marty, who explained how to get money to play the pokies and free tickets for shows and dinners. It didn't take long for LP to click on what they'd have to do to get these freebies. It was a timeshare offer. They would have to sit through a 90-minute presentation, and only then would they be eligible for the $200 to play the pokies, 2 dinners, and tickets to a show. LP figured a couple of hours out of 7 days in Vegas wouldn't be a problem. All they had to do was say no to the sales presentation. They had been through such presentations before and knew what to expect and how to control the events without being taken for a ride. Their mind made up. They agreed to the offer and were issued a card, bearing a time and date when they would be picked up in the basement foyer area of Planet Hollywood. LP thanked Marty and said, "See you then." Ingrid led the way, keen on getting out onto the Strip and soaking up the atmosphere. They walked down the main entrance stairs onto the busy sidewalk. Tourists filled the walkway as they dodged other pedestrians. LP and Ingrid waited for the lights to turn red. "Cross now," LP yelled, as he grabbed Ingrid's hand and led her off the sidewalk as a green walk signal flashed. They headed up Bellagio's driveway and entered through large glass doors to be greeted by a gold statue of Caesar with his right hand stretched out. "Come on, stand over here and I'll take a shot of you and Caesar," Ingrid offered as she pulled her camera from her handbag. LP obliged by standing in the same pose as the statue as tourists and patrons walked by. One click and she had her first photo from Vegas. They then entered the main gambling den, where Ingrid spotted a machine titled Sex in the City. She walked over and said, "Let's play this." Ingrid liked that machine and had a win when the free spins came up, collecting a ticket for $60. LP went over to the cashier and exchanged it for cash. After that, they went back across the road to the Parisian-themed casino next to Planet Hollywood. There they bought tickets to go to the top of the 43-story replica Eiffel Tower. Not as high as the original, but scary enough for a tourist with a French accent to be overheard saying he was not going up in that thing. The 360-degree view from the viewing platform was worth the 20-minute wait to go up in the lift. You could see the old part of Vegas, called Fremont, and snow-capped mountains across the desert plains. Las Vegas skyline looked like a beacon that would light up at night, attracting swarms of tourists to feed on what Vegas had to offer. LP and Ingrid were now starting to feel the effects of jet lag and needed to get some rest. They headed back to Planet Hollywood, but before going up to their room, LP picked up a six-pack of bud and something to munch on. Back in their room overlooking the Strip, LP twisted off a screw cap and savoured his first taste of a bud in Vegas. It was cold, with a light refreshing taste, similar to the beers he liked in Australia. Ingrid placed some savoury biscuits and an avocado dip on the coffee table. They didn't feel like going back out for a meal, staying in their room to finish their drinks and calling it an early night. The next morning, LP phoned up Rick to confirm the conference time. Ingrid made plans with the other women to go shopping at the discount shopping district in the Fremont area while the salespeople discussed shopping. That night, everyone met up in the foyer and headed across the street, passing the beautiful fountains in front of Bellagio's resort. Every half hour, the water spouts would go off with a spectacular display best seen at night, as coloured lights choreographed a symphony in water, delivering a performance that drew hundreds of tourists to fill the sidewalk. What everyone didn't know was a team of divers and technicians underground made it all tick. LP and his group had no time to stop now, as they were going to see one of the most popular shows in Vegas. The Cirque du Soleil show. Performers entertained their captive audience with acrobatic, jaw-dropping precision. Before leaving Australia, the company had bought tickets for the event, and Rick handed them to everyone in his party. LP and Ingrid were seated down close to the stage, 5 rows back to the left. The performers used ropes and swings, but no safety nets, and kept the audience on edge. They could sense that one mistake could cost a performer serious injury, hurtling any one of them across the stage. When the final curtain fell, they all gave the performers a standing ovation. LP and Ingrid left the venue, promising to see his colleagues at the company dinner the next day. LP's mate and his wife, Bill and Sandra, would be flying in the next morning, and they would also be staying at Planet Hollywood. From there, the four were scheduled to travel by bus to the Grand Canyon on Monday. Tuesday morning was set aside for the timeshare presentation for the freebies, followed by a visit to the casinos on the Strip. Wednesday was also set aside for free time. On Thursday, they had plans to catch a bus to the famous Golden Nugget Casino in Fremont, the old part of Vegas. This casino positioned itself as the iconic landmark of another era. It was ticked high on LP's agenda. The Fremont district was a part of Vegas and the original Strip for gamblers past. Even fewer tourists knew of Fremont, except for the presence of a huge shopping precinct where one could buy designer clothing, perfumes, and almost anything else at throwaway prices. Chapter 25. LP started to stir as sunlight filled through the room. He was wide awake, thinking about everything that could happen when they arrived in New York with the scroll. He had brought not one, but several copies. Although they were not the original, LP thought they would deliver a powerful message for anyone who connected with the image. His knowledge of the Dreamtime spirits of Aboriginal folklore, influenced by Brownie's connection to the Glasshouse Mountains, continued to shape his thinking. What he struggled with, as their room warmed up, and before Ingrid awoke, was who would receive the scroll, and exactly where was its final resting place. His vision of being in New York over Easter seemed to be on track with the flight tickets booked before leaving Australia. Departure from Vegas Airport would be at 11:30 Thursday evening. Still, the vision of what might unfold in that city was unclear, except that it involved water. His thoughts wandered back to his childhood days. mixed with pleasure and pain, taking care to recall only the good old times and banishing any negative thoughts of the past. His thoughts flew back to how all this started, when he was barely 12 years old and had his first vision of the future revealed to him, as he lay in bed, looking out his bedroom window at the stars twinkling in the night sky above. In that moment, his destiny was summed up in just a few words. You will be a leader of men. At the time, it seemed impossible, because he struggled with keeping up with his school education and could not imagine that happening. He left school at 15 with a level of learning that was barely enough to land him his first job in the printing industry. Here, his interest in printing and sales started to grow. He learned a lot on the job, laying the foundation for his career in sales and marketing. He thought it funny that fate would have him laying in bed in Vegas on April Fool's Day, thinking of what lay ahead for him in New York. He asked himself if it was all a joke. Was his mind playing tricks on him? The answer undoubtedly would come in New York. Are you awake? Ingrid asked gently. Yes, I can't sleep. I'm wide awake. LP replied, dogged by his concern for the future. He bounded out of bed, trying to focus on the moment and enjoy their holiday destination. Okay, I'm up for a big day, he announced to Ingrid. Then he rang up Bill to catch up and check out Vegas with their wives. Bill answered the call with, You old bastard, you couldn't let us sleep any longer? Cut the crap, LP responded. We'll be at your room in 15 minutes. Let's not waste any more time. There's a lot to do and see. The first thing Sandra said after LP came into their room was, I'm starving. I saw that Harley-Davidson cafe as we came down the strip. Let's go there for breakfast. Everyone walked out together and headed for the lifts. They rode to the ground floor and walked through the main casino area. LP struggled to blank out the sounds of the machines as they went past. LP pointed left, saying, I saw the same place on the way in. It's just up to the road. They walked 2 blocks past construction sites with high safety barriers, then upstairs, along an elevated pathway crossing a road below. Buskers performed their routine along the walkway, looking for tips to be thrown their way. LP stopped and dropped some small change into a guitar case. As a bearded old guy played his guitar, he looked like he needed a good feed. They then took the outdoor elevator stairs and rode them down directly to the Harley-Davidson cafe. They were shown over to their table by the hostess and sat down, looking out onto the main Vegas Strip as the morning unfolded. Under a bright blue skyline with casinos as far as the eye could see, they looked over the menu and decided what to get. LP ordered an omelette and a beer. Bill ordered the same, and the women went with croissants first, followed with bacon and eggs. It was 10 o'clock. What started out as sightseeing in the morning would turn into a lazy afternoon if their waiter didn't hurry up with their meals and drinks. LP asked the waiter how long it would be before their food was served and ordered another beer. The first ice-cold can of Budweiser went down as smooth as silk. The second not so good, as the waiter tripped and spilled a glass of water onto LP's jeans and shirt. He immediately apologised and returned with napkins to soak up the water on his wet clothes, plus a complimentary beer to bring a smile back on his face. Breakfast was served a few minutes later, and by the time LP had finished his third beer, he was pretty relaxed and keen on seeing as many casinos as possible through the rest of the afternoon. They walked past souvenir shops selling clothing so cheap, it prompted Ingrid to buy 4 t-shirts for $10, and as they passed the big yellow arch of McDonald's, the sign in the window read, Burgers 99 cents. LP commented, How cheap is that? We should have gone there and it would have been quicker. In sight was the MGM casino, just a short walk down the road. They entered through a large foyer with slot machines that were hard to avoid. The women said they were going to walk around, while Bill and LP had a beer at the bar. LP looked around at the machines, wondering which one was ready to pay out big time. He pointed over to one that a woman had just left and said, I reckon that one's about to pay. They picked up their beers and walked across. Bill sat down in front of the machine that LP chose. He watched from the adjacent chair as LP took turns on pressing 20 by 5, a $1 bet each time. It wasn't long before the free spins came up, paying out $240. In their excitement of having a good win, LP walked away, leaving his small backpack holding his cameras next to the slot machine. When LP realised he'd left his backpack behind, he panicked. He turned and started to run back, declaring to everyone, I've left my cameras next to that poker machine. Wait here for me. His worst fear was realised. No backpack, only 2 empty beer bottles. He stopped a waitress as she collected their empties and asked if she had seen a backpack. No, sir, but you could check with the lost and found, she said, pointing in that direction. LP strode off to the lost and found sign just around the corner of a row of poker machines. He walked up to the desk and inquired, "Has anyone handed in a small backpack with 2 cameras in it? When did you notice it missing?" The woman at the counter replied. 3:25, replied LP. "Nothing has been turned in," the attendant said. "You can fill out a lost property report over at security. Head over to that glass door and speak to someone there and they will help you." LP did as instructed. By this time, he was already having a panic attack. He could feel his face going red as he wiped beads of perspiration from his head. He stopped in front of the doorway, taking several deep breaths and thinking to himself, "Calm down." He opened the door and proceeded to the security desk, where he was given a form to fill out. After he finished, the head of security escorted LP back to where his backpack had disappeared. While walking back, LP asked if the security cameras could identify the thief, but the official's answer was not hopeful. When he finished his part of the report, he handed it to LP to sign. LP asked again about the security camera overhead. He said, "Surely you could identify who picked up my backpack." The woman sitting in front of my machine was dressed in a bright blue outfit. She would have been captured on camera and would be easy to identify. "Easier said than done," the head of security said nonchalantly. "Las Vegas is the city for opportunists. She is long gone, and the video footage will not identify who she is." A disgruntled LP shook his hand and walked over to where the others were waiting for him. He said, "No luck, the cameras are gone and security can't help." "Let's get out of here," Ingrid replied. "Insurance might cover it. We'll put a claim in through travel insurance when we get back home." LP blanked out any thought of the incident until they arrived back at their room, and then he phoned the police to report his property stolen. They continued to do the tourist thing. Walking in and out of casinos while nursing their drinks was a common practice in this city. To see more of Vegas in the shortest possible time, they would have to ditch any open bottles of alcohol before catching one of the red buses that travel up and down the strip. LP commented to his friends, "Let's do some more sightseeing by bus and put our upfeet up for a while." Ingrid nodded in agreement. When the bus pulled up opposite Planet Hollywood, Ingrid and LP hopped off, leaving their friends to do more sightseeing while they headed straight back to their room to have a rest before the company dinner at 6 o'clock. Bill said, "See you in the morning," as the bus continued along the strip. Everyone from work met in the foyer of Planet Hollywood before heading off together to a Japanese restaurant that Rick had picked. The site for the company's 80th anniversary dinner had been a secret that he still kept close to his chest. Like a regiment of troops following their commander, they marched behind Rick into the restaurant. Entering a small ramp made of cedar, LP looked up to the arcade, which created the illusion of broad daylight. LP commented to Ingrid, "Look, the dome ceiling is painted sky blue with patches of white clouds." She nodded in agreement as the hostess showed them to their seats, which were to the side and in front of a large metal cooktop that was part of their table. Everyone mingled, chatted, and generally had a good time at the company's expense. LP and Ingrid, however, soon grew tired and were the first to leave. They needed to get some sleep, or they wouldn't be up and about for the big day tomorrow. Travelling out to the Grand Canyon. Chapter 26. They met Bill and Sandra at 6 o'clock the next morning and headed out to wait for their ride to the Grand Canyon. They didn't have to wait long before a van pulled up, and the driver jumped out and held open the side door, saying, "Are you folks booked for the Grand Canyon? I'll just tick your names off my list and we'll be on our way." The driver helped Ingrid in, and she sat down by the window, followed by LP and their friends. As the driver got behind the wheel, he commented, "There aren't many people going to where we're heading," Ingrid replied. "We can't wait, even though this is only the transit van to our air-conditioned coach." She was right as always. She pointed out the window as they pulled up against a luxury coach, already packed to capacity with an eager set of tourists, waiting to get on the move to the Grand Canyon. Mark was their driver and Gary the tour guide. Mark looked like someone out of a punk rock band with spiked blonde hair and dark sunglasses. Gary, on the other hand, looked like he'd been a game show host in a past life. Together, they delivered a flawless performance, engaging their audience for nearly 3 hours before they arrived at their destination. 11 passengers on their bus were dropped off first, including LP, Ingrid, Bill, and Sandra. The 40 other tourists continued to the edge of the Grand Canyon West, home of the Hualapai Nation, where a tourist attraction had been built with a glass viewing platform that extended well over the gorge. LP led the way for their small party to enter the helicopter departure shed. They were excited about flying to the canyon floor and then rafting down the Colorado River. However, first they were herded like cattle to be weighed before they could fly on the chopper. LP and Ingrid were separated from their friends and escorted over to the first helicopter. Bill yelled out, "See you down there," as they got ready to board the other helicopter waiting for takeoff. Both choppers' engines roared as they rose from the helipad, angling forward, moving low across the arid landscape, dotted with little vegetation. LP looked down from the rear seat and held his breath. Suddenly, their pilot entered the canyon and pointed the chopper down, giving everyone on board a sense of free falling. Obviously, the pilot knew how to give his passengers the thrill of their lives. After they landed on a cleared dirt patch, LP and Ingrid started climbing down what looked like a mountain goat track, twisting down to the embankment, where boats skippered by Native Americans were waiting to take tourists down the Colorado River. In the middle of nowhere, halfway down the track, they were stopped by a long queue of people waiting for their turn to be helped on board the pontoon. Although it was moored with ropes and tightly secured to two posts, the boat still moved up and down, jostled by fast-flowing water. Their skipper, named Jerry, reached his hand out to help his passengers climb aboard. Ingrid and Sandra chatted while Bill and LP took turns playing shutterbugs. LP was using his iPad as a camera, since his other camera had been stolen. 10 minutes passed as they slowly made their way down the towering walls of the canyon gorge and boarded their ride. Jerry motored them across to the other side of the river, close to the cliff face and away from the current. He idled his motor as he spoke of his ancestors. He told the story of how they lived under the shadow of a great eagle captured in stone. LP knew what he was talking about because Gary had pointed out the rock formation when the bus stopped to let them off. LP asked Jerry if he would take a picture of him in the driver's seat, cruising along the waterway. Jerry obliged, cutting short his story and taking LP's iPad, saying, "Don't push the throttle, it's dangerous to try for someone new on the river." After the picture was taken, Jerry regained control and continued his tour. 15 minutes later, they disembarked and moved quickly up to their waiting helicopters. LP and Ingrid boarded the first chopper, while Bill and Sandra followed in the second. It was a coordinated shuttle service, timed with Army precision. Land and water were connected to get as many tourists on board on time to connect with their bus drivers. It was a thrilling ride back to the helipad. As the helicopter ascended out of the canyon, the pilot banked into a tight right-hand turn, going around a bend in the gorge. The suddenly flat landscape zoomed by, with the landing site only minutes away. Their Grand Canyon experience was almost over, signalling them to take their last photos. After landing, they thanked their pilot and followed the cement pathway back to a white domed tent opposite where they were weighed in for takeoff. Inside the building, Ingrid and Sandra walked around, looking through souvenirs to remind them of this part of their exciting holiday. The women settled on jewelry pieces, earrings, bracelets, and perfume that symbolized their spiritual connection to the Navajo people. Bill and LP were more practical, buying t-shirts with 4 Navajo Indians on the front and the phrase "Homeland Security" since 1492. The Indians were outfitted in European clothing from that bygone era, holding rifles close to their chests with bullet belts casually slung over each shoulder. LP continued to browse, stumbling on something called a dream catcher. The trinket could be hung by the bed rest or windowsill. One part caught the bad dreams in its web, while the other part allowed the good dreams to sift through. Feathers attached allowed the good dreams, akin to dewdrops, to evaporate to the Great Spirit resting in the morning sun. Prayer beads trapped all the bad dreams and burned them up. Goosebumps tingled his body as he read the story of the dream catcher, and then he decided to pick one off the rotating display stand, taking it with his other purchase to the pay counter. After making his purchase, LP caught up with everyone else outside, and then they all walked to their bus to connect with the other passengers at the main tourist site. As Mark drove along the dusty dirt road, Gary once again pointed out the rock formation depicting the eagle spirit. It was like viewing a magic eye picture. You needed to look beyond the rock to see what Gary was pointing to. When all the tourists on the bus agreed with Gary they had got the picture, LP felt he also connected with the Navajo Dreamtime spirit. Mark stopped and parked the bus, while Gary pointed to a queue standing in the blazing heat outside a tin shed. Gary said, "Grab some grub to eat over there, and I'll see you all back at the bus in 1 hour." LP, Ingrid, Bill, and Sandra lined up for their meal, and then sat down at a table that provided a panoramic view of the Grand Canyon. After they finished, the men left the women chatting and walked to the edge of the gorge. There were no barriers to stop anyone from hanging their toes over the edge for a once-in-a-lifetime photo. Bill did exactly that while LP stood back and snapped the picture. LP then jumped across a crevice in the rock edge, going down 3,000 feet. Bill walked over to LP while looking at his pictures he had taken on his iPhone. His next step would have been his last, if not for LP's quick reflexes. Bill stumbled, not seeing the danger before him. As he lost his balance and was about to fall down to certain death, he grabbed LP's right leg just above the knee. LP's foresight had him just a nanosecond ahead of what was unfolding. He reached out and grabbed his mate's right wrist, pulling him across the 2-foot gap, dropping to the canyon floor. Surprisingly, Bill didn't drop his phone. "Bloody hell, mate, where did that come from?" he said while looking back down to what could have happened. LP replied, "Keep your eyes open, or the evil spirit will take you away, and it won't be by bus." The tour coach was ready to depart as everyone met back at the bus as arranged. Gary was standing outside the door, waving and saying, "Hurry up!" LP and Ingrid were the first on board and sat down where she left her handbag. Bill and Sandra sat opposite for the journey back to Vegas. Bill leant back, closed his eyes, and said, "Wake me when we're in Vegas." The trip back went quickly, as most passengers caught a bit of shut-eye. "Wake up, Bill. We're here at Planet Hollywood," said Sandra. Bill stretched his hands high above his head and said, "I flew on the wings of the eagle above the canyon and saw that my time to depart this world is not now." Sandra replied, "We're not leaving Vegas until Friday. What are you talking about?" "Nothing. It's just a strange dream I had," whispered Bill. "Nothing to worry about." They all thanked Gary and Mark for a safe and entertaining trip. Then they shook hands and left tips in the jar next to the steering wheel as they departed. Bill and Sandra said they were going to play the pokies, while LP and Ingrid went back to their room to freshen up. At 8, they planned to check out the nightlife of Vegas. Before leaving their room, LP phoned Bill and said, "Meet you down at the roulette wheel." LP wanted to gamble on at least one table while still in Vegas. He figured he had a few minutes left to win or lose until Bill and Sandra arrived. He changed 5 $20 notes for $52 chips. He did his usual thing, placing one chip on number 23 and quarter bets on the surrounding numbers. Luck was not on his side tonight. By the time their friends arrived, his wallet was $100 lighter. Ingrid was not impressed, but LP reminded her about the next morning, hoping he wouldn't hear any more about losing money. Free poker money was on the table if they sat through an hour-and-a-half presentation about buying a timeshare accommodation. "Hi guys, winning or losing?" Bill called out in a loud baritone voice. "Don't want to talk about it," LP replied. "Let's get out of here." He turned, took Ingrid's hand, and led her out of the casino. LP led them next door to the Parisian casino with its own Eiffel Tower. Once again, before they could get in the lift, they had to wait in a queue for about 20 minutes. It was well worth the wait as they looked out over the lights of Las Vegas. The neon lights adorning the strip made it a magical sight, contrasted by the dry brown land they had seen in daylight. They didn't stay long. It was getting cold as the breeze picked up. When they walked out of the lift, they could hear an announcement being made. "The tower is closed due to the strong winds. Please keep your tickets and return tomorrow." That was close. "We made it up and down just in time," LP said. Ingrid replied, "I don't think I can walk another step. My feet are swollen and I need to put them up somewhere." LP responded, "I'll go back with you to our room." Ingrid gave Bill and Sandra a hug, and LP took Ingrid back to their hotel. There was still 3 days to cram more of Vegas in before their flight out. An early night would help them be on the ball to receive their freebies after the timeshare presentation. LP dropped his head on the pillow, and it wasn't long before he was snoring as Ingrid fell asleep watching TV. Chapter 27. Up bright and early, they showered and dressed for another day in Las Vegas. They headed down to the foyer and walked over to where they would be picked up for the presentation. While they waited, LP said, "When the sales guy asks for an acknowledgement to a question, say either 'No, I'll have to think about that,' or I'll have to just run it past my accountant first. Ingrid agreed as a transit van pulled up. The driver jumped out from behind the wheel and opened the side door. He asked, "Are LP and Ingrid here?" LP answered, "Yes." "Climb aboard. I have a few more passengers to pick up and you'll all be on time for registration," the driver said. After filling his van with 11 passengers, their driver drove 2 blocks and pulled into another basement, stopping outside a large metal door. Ingrid had a worried look on her face, thinking of a worst-case scenario. Could this be a con, she thought, a hostage situation, or are we about to be robbed? Their driver pushed open the sliding door for everyone to exit. "Follow me," he instructed. The metal door opened to reveal a flight of stairs, beyond which lay another door. The driver opened that too, and a sudden bright light lit up the stairwell. Ingrid had no idea where she was and started to panic. She liked to think she could control every situation and give orders on what to do, but not this time. She had a sinking feeling they were caught in a hostage situation. Her fears were unfounded as they walked out through the doorway onto the strip. Ingrid got her bearings and suddenly said, "I know where we are. That's Planet Hollywood," as she pointed down the street. She took a deep breath and started smiling, saying to LP, "I was getting a bit worried where all this was going to lead us to." Out of one door and into the next adjacent doorway, they stood waiting for the lift doors to open. The wait wasn't long before they were walking past 12 small round tables to the reception desk. After registering, they were introduced to James, who would deliver the sales pitch to convince them to buy what they had on offer. He showed them over to a table and seated Ingrid and LP directly facing him. He had a sales folder that would keep him on track throughout the presentation, as each page turned would lead to a decision to buy. That was his plan. For LP, it was the opposite. Resist the sales pitch and say no and receive the gifts offered. LP knew all the sales tactics that would be thrown at them and responded with answers that would not lead to a decision. After an hour and a half of playing this game, James conceded defeat and called over a young woman for a debriefing. She asked how they felt about the presentation and if there were any more questions they would like to ask that would change their mind. She reminded them again that buying into a lifestyle dream that only the rich and famous indulge themselves in was within their reach. Still, their answer was no. She reached into her folder and pulled out 2 free tickets to a show, coupons for dinner for 2, and a $200 voucher to redeem for poker money to gamble on slots. Her last words were, "Have a nice day." As she escorted them over to the front desk, LP said, "We won't worry about a ride back to our hotel. We'll walk, it's not far." The young woman showed them to the lift, and 1 minute later, they were back on the strip. It was lunchtime as they zigzagged their way across a packed sidewalk with people going in either direction. Although Planet Hollywood was in sight, Ingrid decided to take the bus, as her feet were still aching. A red bus arrived at the stop, and LP helped Ingrid up the first step. They moved down the aisle and held on to the nearest pole. The bus stopped outside Bellagio Resort, and from there they headed back to the cafe outside Planet Hollywood on the opposite side. They walked to the reception without having to stand in a queue for the first time. LP commented, "You beauty, no lineup, can't beat that." They were shown over to a table for 2. As tourists walked past carrying their alcoholic drinks and souvenir bottles hanging from their neck, LP looked down onto the strip and got a sense of what made Vegas tick. It wasn't buildings or the bright lights. It was the freedom to do what you wanted to do, be it drinking, gambling, or phoning a number flashing on a billboard truck as it drove up and down the strip, flaunting images of scantily clad, beautiful women. Sin City was the name Vegas had well earned, but in the end, the state of Nevada followed their relaxed laws relating to forbidden sins. 40 million people visited Las Vegas every year, which speaks volumes for itself. They must be doing something right, and it seemed to satisfy a need within the human psyche, LP thought to himself. Their waitress walked over and smiled, saying, "How are you enjoying your day?" Ingrid answered, "We're having a great time." "What would you have to drink?" the young woman asked. "We'll have a bud and a bourbon and cola, please," LP replied. When she returned, LP ordered nachos to share. They were by now starting to soak up the atmosphere that was Vegas under a bright sunny day. After lunch, LP said he was going to play the pokies, whether Ingrid liked it or not. This was Vegas, and he was going to try his luck and see if he could hit the jackpot. Ingrid left him to play on his own. She knew he was a risk taker and did not wish to cramp his style when he gambled. She declared, "I'm heading back to the room." LP left their waitress a $10 tip and walked over to the mall entrance to Planet Hollywood, leaving Ingrid to go her way. LP was like a kid in a candy shop, wanting to taste all the sweets. But what attracted him the most was something he had never seen in Australia: a large video screen depicting a battleship-themed gaming machine. LP sat at one of 4 seats in front of it and looked up and across as 3 other people pushed notes down the throat of their machines that were all linked to other jackpots. LP slipped $20 in his machine, but found no luck. Before walking away, he pressed a 5-cent bet. Suddenly, the sound of cannon fire had LP turning around and looking to the screen above as it went into action, depicting a battleship flotilla at war, firing shots across their bow. He quickly walked back to the machine he was playing and waited to see if he was the winner of the battle, which would win him 11 times his bet. That'll be 55 cents, he thought. Big deal. To his amazement, he won all the bets accumulated by the other players, amounting to $265. LP looked over to the losers and said, "That was a bit of luck. My last bet was 5 cents, and I was walking away. Tell you what, when I collect, I'll come back and give you $20 each." He did just that, to the amazement of the other players who lost when the feature finished. He then headed back to his room, exiting the lift on floor 18. He turned right and walked to the end of the corridor, pulled his security card out of his top pocket and pushed it in the slot below the door handle. There were no bells and whistles as he pushed down the handle and entered the room. He thought he would hear, "How much did you lose this time?" But he was in luck. Ingrid was snoring. Actually, no matter what answer he gave his wife, he would be the poorer for it. If he said he won, Ingrid would want to share it, to buy presents and souvenirs. If he said nothing, he'd get, "I told you so. Stay away from those one-armed bandits." A third option was to say, "I didn't stay long and broke even." LP decided on using this option. He tiptoed into their room and quietly laid down on the bed without waking Ingrid. After a while, LP gave Ingrid a wake-up call with a gentle nudge on the shoulder. She stirred and asked, "How long was I asleep?" "Not long. I followed up soon after you left and had a snooze too," LP replied. No more questions were asked as they got themselves ready for a night out in Vegas on the cheap. They decided to take in a show and dinner in the same mall area not far from Planet Hollywood. The show they picked to see was the Ultimate Variety Show. It started at 8, and they arrived an hour earlier to find 2 queues with a long lineup of people already waiting to get in. To their surprise, the Mexican restaurant they had tickets for was directly opposite the theatre. From there, they could sit down, grab a bite, and watch when everyone started moving inside. This would be their cue to leave a tip and follow the line to their seats for the comedy show. When the performance ended, the entertainers stood near the exit for autographs and photos. LP and Ingrid thought the show was fantastic and had photographs taken with some of the performers. Their talent to entertain with comedy, magic, and stunts few other people in the world could duplicate made it one of the best shows they had ever seen. It was now getting late, so they headed back to their room for an early night. Chapter 28. Looking out of their hotel window at sunrise, LP watched as once again Vegas transformed from a desert city of coloured lights peppered with stars on a dark horizon. The city, now awake with grey shadows moving across the road below, slowly heralded in a new day. LP had an eerie feeling. He thought how strange this place was, a city born of the desert and nourished by water and power from the Hoover Dam and fed by tourists day after day. Wednesday was reserved for a bus ride to Fremont. It was the original Vegas Strip before casinos sprang up closer to the airport. It still had a few famous casinos, like the Golden Nugget, which LP aimed to visit before leaving Vegas. Ingrid and LP freshened up and headed for the bus stop directly opposite Planet Hollywood. They had to wait only a few minutes before their ride arrived. The staff and tourist guides told them to stick to the Strip if they didn't wish to run into any trouble. They weren't too sure what they meant by that peculiar statement. However, LP had received a similar warning on their trip to Hawaii 20 years ago. That time, it was another offshore conference celebrating 60 years in business. They hopped on a bus bearing a Honolulu sign. The driver advised them to take another bus as they were going in the wrong direction, but LP ignored his advice. He paid for 2 tickets, and they sat down on an empty bus that took them off the tourist route and headed for the centre of the island. Inhabited by the locals, it presented a stark contrast to the polished part of Waikiki. They began to worry upon seeing the dilapidated houses that dotted the poorer part of the island. Some houses had tarps over their roofs and cried out for repairs. Some front yards had car wrecks as a welcome sign to their property. However, what they also saw when they looked up was a mountain peak covered in green vegetation and moss. A cloud hung above as they experienced a light mist of rain. It created its own microcosm that gave a magical air to the island. Upon recalling that incident, LP and Ingrid braced themselves. Were they about to experience something similar in Vegas? Once their bus left the Vegas Strip, it followed the motorway directly to the old section of town. This was their first glimpse of suburbia, and there was no sight of any rundown part of town. The bus halted opposite the Golden Nugget Casino, and LP and Ingrid crossed to the other side of the road to enter the casino. He pointed over to a couple of machines where they could sit down and try their luck. It wasn't long before a waitress walked over and asked, "What would you have to drink? They're free if you're playing." LP ordered the usual. He was in a serious mood, determined to win on the pokies and find the whereabouts of the 3.6 kilo gold nugget that was sold to some guy from Vegas. That deal was done in Melbourne, and he expected to find it here in this casino. They finished their drinks and collected a ticket from the poker machine to redeem his small win. When LP went over to the cashier, he asked if a gold nugget was on display. Her answer was, "Yes, come back tonight and see the light show outside. We have a guided tour of the casino and you'll see the gold nugget." The cashier exchanged his ticket for cash, and then Ingrid and LP walked through the foyer, exiting the way they came in. LP's theory on how to win on the pokies was starting to pay off now. After many years of observation and insider knowledge, he figured he knew how to win more often than lose. The trick was he spent no more than $20 on a machine. He avoided sitting down and didn't stay at one machine for far too long. That way, he had more wins than losses. They decided to head back to Planet Hollywood and rest up. Later that night, they would return to see the light display and take the guided tour through the Golden Nugget Casino. By the time they returned to their room and caught up on some sleep, they were ready for another night on the town. Ingrid phoned reception to book a taxi before leaving their room. They headed down in the lift and walked out through the foyer to a waiting cab driver who asked, "Are you guys going to Fremont?" LP answered yes, and they stepped in for a 20-minute ride to the Golden Nugget. The cabbie stopped opposite the casino and said, "That'll be $21. LP handed him $5 extra as a tip and said, "Thanks." The driver politely held open the rear door for his passengers. The sidewalk was abuzz with people jostling past each other. Suddenly, the music started rolling as they pushed their way through the crowd. Standing at the corner intersection of the casino, they looked up to a huge canopy that covered the 2 street blocks. They watched a video clip of the band Queen with Freddie Mercury belting out Bohemian Rhapsody. It was the most amazing light and sound show, and they arrived just in time to catch the 9 o'clock spectacle. Next was the tour. LP was on the hunt to find where the gold nugget was showcased. Walking past rows of poker machines, LP spotted a waitress and asked her, "Where do we find the tour?" She pointed to a group of people and said, "Wait over there with them." They did as instructed. A few minutes passed before they were greeted by a young woman named Melody. She briefly explained what parts of the casino they'd be going through and made a point of saying, "Stick together, or you could get lost in here and not find your way out." Melody started walking, and like a little flock of sheep, everyone followed her. She gave a history lesson about the Golden Nugget and its checkered past when the mafia mob were forced out of the other American states for racketeering. They found a safe haven in Las Vegas, where gambling, alcohol, and prostitution were legal. These welcome visitors set up legitimate businesses that created the foundation for the city to flourish and become what it is today, the tourist capital of the world. After walking past dozens of gambling tables and hundreds of slot machines, they found themselves before a large glass cabinet. Like everyone else in the group, LP was pretty impressed with what he saw. Melody started to explain how the nugget came into their possession. It was found in Australia in the early 70s and named the Hand of Faith. It was bought by casino management to attract tourists to their casino. LP suddenly turned to Ingrid and said, "I've seen enough. Let's get out of here." This isn't the 3.6 kilo nugget sold to a bloke from Vegas, as I suspected. It was 10 o'clock when they finally walked out and hailed a taxi to take them to their hotel. Arriving outside Planet Hollywood, LP and Ingrid walked up the stairs and entered the mall entrance, where LP bought 2 buds to take to their room. LP said, "Let's head back to the room. We can catch up on what's happening in the world on TV." LP entered the room first and turned on the TV. Ingrid followed and walked into the bathroom, where LP had left Ingrid's bottle of cola and bottled water on ice, not where you would expect, but in the sink before leaving for Fremont. They both sat down and relaxed while watching the news and weather report. Sightseeing and shopping were on the agenda for tomorrow, and the sun was supposed to shine all day. New York would also have fine weather. They would be leaving Las Vegas Airport for New York at 11:30 that night. The next morning, they were up at 7 and started packing. They would leave their luggage in Bill and Sandra's room later in the morning and book out at 10. Their plan was to return to the room around 5, have farewell drinks, and then catch a taxi at 8 to catch their flight to New York. All was going to plan as they stepped onto a bus back to Fremont's shopping precinct, travelling along the same route as the night before by taxi. LP and Ingrid's bus stopped directly outside the main entrance. As LP stepped off the bus, he looked at his map of the sprawling shopping precinct. It was shaped like a horseshoe and led to another exit opposite another bus stop, which would take them back to Planet Hollywood. They walked towards the first shops, offering discounted products. LP wanted to buy a pair of Levi Strauss jeans, and Ingrid looked for some perfume. It was less expensive than in Australia. It wasn't long before LP spotted the Levi factory outlet sign and left Ingrid testing perfume at an outdoor kiosk. He walked inside and couldn't believe the prices. At $32, they cost half of what he would have had to shell out in Australia. He tried on 2 pairs and bought both, thinking, "What a bargain." After he read the inside label, he found his new pair were made in Egypt and the other pair in Bangladesh. He understood why they were priced so cheap. Ingrid joined him and chatted about the bargain perfume she had bought. After paying for his jeans, they headed for the food court and sat down to a shared meal of nachos. All the meals served were so large, they made a habit of buying a meal for one and sharing it. When they finished, they headed for the bus stop. They crossed the road and waited for the next bus that would drop them off at Planet Hollywood. They waited only for a few minutes before the bus arrived. This was the end of their shopping and sightseeing. By the time they got back to the casino and went up to Bill and Sandra's room, it was already 5 in the afternoon. LP knocked on their door and was greeted with a beer, twisted, opened by his mate. "Get this in you," said Bill. Time passed by quickly, and before they knew it, they were in a taxi heading for McCarran Airport, booking in at 8:25. They were taking no chances of missing their flight to New York. The airport and flight would be their accommodation overnight, as they were landing at JFK Airport at 7:20 the next morning. During the flight, LP and Ingrid got some sleep in. "We are now an hour and a half out from New York," the captain announced. "Breakfast will be served soon." That was the end of any further shut-eye for Ingrid and LP, as the plane's interior lights came up from dull to bright, with flight attendants flitting about with breakfast trays. Landing on time, they collected their overhead carry-on cases and slowly walked down the aisle, exiting from the plane's front door. All the other passengers were heading in the same direction to collect their luggage from the carousel, so they followed the herd. Airport security officers were everywhere, as they looked around to find signs on how to get out of the terminal. It didn't take long before they were standing outside, taking in the cool air of New York on a fine sunny day. They waited at the commuter rank for their shuttle service, which was to arrive at 8 o'clock and take them to their hotel. Chapter 29. LP grew anxious as they waited for their ride to their hotel on 8th Avenue, verging on another panic attack. He could hardly hide his excitement. He wanted to soak up as much of the atmosphere of the Big Apple, and it couldn't come soon enough. He planned to cram a lot of things on his hit list into his schedule. Ingrid had her own list of places to visit. 4 days were not going to be enough to do it all, but they were going to give it their best shot. Ingrid turned to LP, interrupting his silence, and said, "Let's hope this is our ride to Manhattan." The driver stopped and wound down his window to inquire, "Are you LP and Ingrid?" LP replied, "Yes. Are we the only pickups here?" "Yes, sir," the driver said. "Let me put your baggage in the back. It will be a quick trip to your hotel." 1 hour later was not a quick trip, but it was just as good as any tour guide could give of this city, so that came as a bonus. Before they were dropped off at their hotel, he took them through the back lanes of Manhattan after a detour to explore the narrow, mean streets of Harlem. LP looked up at the towering skyscrapers as they made their way to their destination, the Hilton Garden Inn on 8th Avenue. He turned to Ingrid and commented, "We just got our first tour of New York for free." She nodded in unison. When they arrived at their hotel, the driver helped them unload. They entered the foyer, pulling and struggling to carry their luggage to the reception desk. It was too early to get their keys for their room, so the young clerk let them store their luggage in the cloakroom behind the front desk. They were told to return at 2 o'clock, by which time their room would be cleaned and ready. They tipped their help $2 and walked back onto 8th Avenue. They walked a short distance and went into the building where they would get their tickets to ride the red double-decker tour bus. They then left the building and strolled along, passing their first subway entrance on the corner of 8th Avenue and 14th Street. Ingrid commented, "We have to catch the subway before leaving New York." LP nodded in agreement. The bus stop was only 20 paces away. Standing in a queue, they waited to board the next red bus going to Central Park as a chill wind channeled through the skyscrapers and tenements on either side of 8th Avenue. Their bus ride would give them some ideas on what attractions to see and where to go before heading back home to Australia. Several hours passed, with the wind picking up, chilling the air down to 10 degrees. LP's earlobes were a barometer on how cold it was. He figured it was freezing cold compared to the temperatures in Brisbane. It was a hot, steamy day with a heat haze almost blocking out the Glasshouse Mountains. They sat on the top deck of the double-decker bus, which looked exactly like London's red buses, except they were without a roof. That's why LP was feeling the cold on his ears and his bald head. He and Ingrid talked about what they wanted to visit. The observation deck of Rockefeller Center, Ground Zero, the DA, Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Statue of Liberty, and Times Square, plus, if time allowed, a Broadway show. He also intended to meet up with publishers for his books. The Easter break would make it hard to do all that. However, they wasted no time in getting out and taking in the sights, sounds, and smell of spring in New York. Before returning to their hotel, they picked up some snack food from the corner store. The basement level opened up to a mini supermarket, and LP grabbed a 6-pack of buds to knock down in their room and relax. He returned to reception and was handed their key cards for room 709. The duty manager greeted them with a smile and said, "Your luggage will follow in a few minutes. Enjoy your stay with us, and anything you need, please ask." They proceeded to their room, entering the lift to the 7th floor and then walking a long corridor to the last door on their right. LP pushed the security card into the door slot, pulled down the handle, and entered the space that was going to be their home away from home for the next 4 days. Their luggage arrived within minutes, announced with a loud knock on the door. LP tipped the young bloke and asked, "How long have you been working in New York?" He proceeded to fill LP in on his life story before closing the door behind him. LP opened 2 beers and placed them on his bedside table. He sat down on the edge of their bed and handed one to Ingrid, saying, "We made it to New York on time. All we've got to do is fit in everything planned and we'll be fine. Good luck on that one. You'll need another 7 days to do what you want to do," she quipped. "No problem," he said. "We'll just come back again, but travel east to west via India, Europe, and on to New York, travelling on around-the-world tickets. I'll just have to score another offshore trip paid by the company and tag on a couple of extra weeks." LP stood up and looked out their window. Down the road, he could see two Broadway theatres, a short walk around the corner from 8th Avenue, and directly across from them was a church. There was no queue for the Friday night gathering at St. Malachy's, compared to the hundreds of people lined up to see Chicago and the Book of Mormon. LP turned to Ingrid and said, "Let's go visit that church. It's Good Friday, and I haven't been inside a church since the towers fell on 9/11. Ingrid freshened up, and they then walked around the corner and entered the church. They were late and sat in the back pew. LP remembered the rituals of past, but didn't recognise this service. It wasn't as such a mass, but the priest's acknowledgement of their Saviour's death on the cross, their Saviour, their deity, and his promise of life renewed. It brought a tear to LP's eyes. They stayed only 10 minutes and then stood up quietly, turned, and walked out of the church. LP pulled out $10 out of his wallet and dropped it in the donation box on the way out. After walking out of St. Malachy's, they walked past all the theatregoers lined up on the sidewalk. Both sides of the street were blocked, with a restless audience keen on catching the next performance. They turned right into Broadway and towards Times Square. LP commented, "Jet lag is starting to kick in. We won't stay out much longer. I think we need an early night to make a big day of it tomorrow." As they got closer to their destination, they could see that the roads leading to Times Square were closed, with New York police officers manning yellow barricades. He wondered if there had been a terrorist threat. It turned out to be nothing that serious, just Nicki Minaj giving a free performance in Times Square. LP and Ingrid watched her perform two of her best-selling singles, and then they walked back to their room, leaving thousands of fans cheering and applauding the singer. Finally, after returning to their hotel room, LP changed into his warm tracksuit, fell into bed, and pulled up the bed cover. He then said, "I'll be first up in the morning. I'll wake you for an early start." Chapter 30. LP bounded out of bed early, as light filtered through dense morning fog into their room. He reached for his glasses on the side table and walked over to the window, looking out to the street below. Not all would appreciate another day, he thought, as he looked down and watched a homeless African-American man trying to keep warm, sleeping on the top stair with his back leaning against the door of St. Malachy's. Here was a man who needed shelter and help, but the doors were closed to him. Those behind closed doors seemed to fail this man, while those of faith slept safely. An irony, LP thought. The sound of clanging woke the homeless man, who slowly stood up, unsteady on his feet, and started walking towards 8th Avenue. New York's garbage trucks were the first sounds of the city coming back to life. LP made a cup of tea for Ingrid, and then shaved, showered, and put on some warm clothes for an early start on New York's landmarks. Ingrid freshened up after LP and put on some makeup. He suggested she wear jeans, since it would be freezing. It could be even colder if the wind blew as strong as yesterday. As they left the room on the 7th floor to take in the sights and sounds of New York, what they didn't expect to encounter was a fire alarm. When LP went to press the lift button, an alarm blared. As the fire doors closed automatically, Ingrid started to panic and exclaimed, "Oh my God, what's happening?" LP calmly walked over to the doors and pushed them open. In the corridor, other guests were sticking their heads out of their doorways, with concerned looks on their faces, most likely thinking, could this be a bomb or terrorist attack? LP came back to Ingrid and gave her a reassuring hug. He glanced over her shoulder and saw a phone on a small desk. "I'll phone reception and see what's going on," he said. He called up the duty manager, but there was no answer. He looked over to Ingrid and shook his head. "Ring again," she pleaded. This time, someone answered, and before LP could speak, the duty manager said, "Someone set off the fire alarm on floor 7. Did you see anyone acting suspicious?" "No," he answered. "Wait a couple of minutes and press the lift button," the manager said, "and everything will be working fine." He was right. While LP paced up and down, the lift lights came on. He pressed the lift button, the doors opened, and they descended to the ground floor. Walking into the foyer, they were confronted by a bunch of burly firefighters, one carrying an axe and another pulling a fire hose through the entrance. They figured everything was under control as they walked past New York's finest, onto 8th Avenue, past the fire truck double parked out front of where they were staying. They headed for the bus stop. LP and Ingrid joined the queue. They didn't have to wait long before it arrived. First on their agenda was the Rockefeller Center, which was 20 minutes away. Hopping off the bus, they followed the crowd to enter the building that would take them up to the observation floor towering above New York. LP bought tickets for $18 each and was told to come back in 20 minutes. LP suggested a drink in the cafe, just 3 shop fronts up from where they were standing. They walked up a small incline leading to the coffee shop. Ingrid stood in front of the cashier and ordered coffee and a Budweiser for LP. Seated, they chatted about what to do after going to the top of the rock, as New Yorkers like to call it. They decided the Metropolitan Museum of Art would be next on their hit list. Ingrid finished her short black first and said, "Knock that beer down quick, we've got to go." What they hadn't expected was a long queue with security, as they have it at the airport. This would take another 15 minutes before being escorted to their lift, where they were packed in shoulder to shoulder for what felt like a ride to the top of the world. When the lift doors opened, LP and Ingrid pushed their way through the crowd and walked out onto an open-air area with high glass panels acting as guardrails, stopping anyone from falling 70 floors to the street below. Looking out to the Empire State Building and other towering structures reminded him of early Bible lessons. One passage from Revelation came to mind. Upon the head will be the mark of the beast. What LP was seeing was not one, but many symbols of corporations wielding more power than individual governments. He had a vision of the future as he stood looking down at the most powerful city in the world, which could be renamed New Babylon, where the Antichrist would be chained and brought to kneel. He thought, when that happens, the serpent with many heads and its creation will fall and obey the will of the people. It won't be the other way around. LP, snap out of it, Ingrid said. You're daydreaming. Take a photo of me with the Empire State Building in the background. Ingrid's voice shook him out of his daydreaming mood. He held up his iPad and snapped a few photos. They walked around to another viewing area with Central Park in the backdrop. LP took another photo with Ingrid smiling. He then turned and said, "Follow me. We've been up here long enough." He was getting impatient to move on to the Met. Pointing over to the lift area, he took Ingrid's hand and pushed through the crowd to wait in another queue to go back down to street level. Exiting the lift, they walked past a large cafeteria, looking to the back glass panels, where children and parents enjoyed a bright sunny day on an outdoor ice skating rink. LP commented, "Just shows how cold it is out there. When you can skate on the ice, it doesn't melt under the midday sun." They headed back to the bus stop and waited to go to their next destination, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The red double-decker bus stopped almost at the steps of an impressive sandstone building. Looking up at a wide flight of 50 or so stone steps leading to a huge entrance, Ingrid and LP proceeded to climb. Entering the building, they were greeted by the giant skeleton of a dinosaur. LP walked around the display and bought tickets to cover the museum at the 3 levels. They spent 2 hours walking through as many exhibits as possible. Really, they needed 2 days to take in everything. But time was limited, and Ingrid was developing blisters on her feet. She couldn't walk for much longer, and LP realised that they would have to cut the tour short. Nonetheless, unable to resist the temptation, he said, "We'll go after seeing 2 more displays. I've come halfway around the world to see them." He had a keen interest in the Mayan culture and the Big Bang Theory. Here, he hoped to find answers to questions that dogged his thinking. His interest in Mayan culture dated back to his days at school, when he received as an award a book on Mayan and Aztec people. Thereafter, he knuckled down and studied up on as much as he could about these 2 civilizations. As they entered the main display, he felt awestruck. He was now standing in front of a large, round stone tablet, 20 centimetres thick and measuring over 200 centimetres in diameter. It looked like a sundial. He eagerly looked around for another stone tablet that had 23 cogs and could predict sunspot activity. Mayan high priests used that calendar to make long-range weather forecasts before planting crops. They were very knowledgeable when it came to mapping the stars and drawing up calendars for ceremonies and crop planting. When Hernan Cortes arrived in Cuba, he set his sights on the Yucatan Peninsula. He had gathered an armada of ships and named his flagship Capitana. With his fleet of Spanish galleons and 550 men, 16 horses, and 12 cannons, they anchored off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. After landing, he found the Aztec culture, in some ways, was far more advanced in understanding how the sun affected the weather, but on the downside, Human sacrifices and tribal warfare weakened them, leading to their conquest by Europeans. Cortes used this to his advantage, siding with the native Totonac Indians to settle border disputes. This strategy enabled him to strengthen his conquistadores with 1,000 native warriors and 200 porters. He left a small number of men to hold the fort at Veracruz, and then led his party 200 kilometres inland to reach the Aztec capital, where he was welcomed as a god by their ruler, Montezuma. That's when LP believed Cortes discovered the importance of their calendars. After entering the city, they were copied. When he returned, he laid siege to the city. After 88 days, he and his men entered the capital and burnt it to the ground. They also caused massive destruction to the stone temples. Most of LP's work life revolved around calendars and the passage of time. Yet this exhibit would not shed any light on the coincidence of a photo taken 2 years earlier and a measurement relating to 23. The photo of Mount Biwa with the setting sun on its peak was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. That photo was taken from the observation tower on Wild Horse Mountain, 123 metres above sea level. A cement path wide enough for a vehicle to drive up made it an easy climb. LP looked for a deeper meaning to the photo. When he had it blown up, he thought, what if I drew a triangle bordering the sun? He was amazed that the calculation came to be an equilateral triangle measuring 23 millimetres. The number 23 continued to be everywhere he looked. His street number was 23. His credit card expiry dates added up to 23, and his email address had the number 23 in it. He also discovered the largest recorded solar flare was in the year 1859, and when he added up those numerals, the result was 23. To an extent, LP was fixated on that number, imagining that one day it may deliver something important. The Mayan exhibit was giving no further clues on his question. What would the number 23 possibly deliver other than coincidence? Nor was there any sign or mention in the exhibit of the Mayan long count calendar that ended in 2012 after 5,125 years. His interest in the history of calendars dating back to the Julian calendar led him to believe in conspiracy theories. The truth of how the Gregorian calendar came into existence as the modern-day calendar in use throughout the world was answered after the discovery of the Maya calendars. The Julian calendar had gone out of sync with the rotation of the Earth and Sun. In 1582, it was replaced by the Gregorian calendar, endorsed by and named for Pope Gregory XIII. LP's theory was that the Vatican deciphered the Maya sunstone, giving us the current calendar as we use it today. At first, many countries didn't act on the Pope's declaration that urged them to expel 10 days from the 5th of October, as some people thought they were going to miss out on more than a week's rent or taxes. The reaction to the proposed change was mixed. It was a bit like daylight saving time, where some people couldn't get their heads around winding back their clocks by an hour. In 1918, however, Russia caught up with the rest of the world by changing their calendar at the end of January. The 31st was followed by February 14. That made Russia's calendar more accurate than the Gregorian calendar. Indeed, some argue that the Iranian calendar is even more precise. At this point, LP turned to Ingrid and said, "Let's check out the science exhibit and then we can get out of here." They walked down a spiral ramp, experiencing the birth of time, reaching the present, measured with a blink. Next, they waited in line to enter a dome chamber that simulated the Big Bang. It lasted 5 minutes, giving all those standing around a darkened sphere a sense of being godlike. Cosmic dust formed burning suns, and a multitude of planets and moons created the galaxies that are beyond counting. It was an experience of a lifetime. As Ingrid and LP left that exhibit, he stopped and said, "Take a picture of me touching this meteorite." Ingrid obliged as she focused the camera. LP smiled and said, "I've just touched something that has been hurtling through space for billions of years. How's that?" After she snapped the picture, they then backtracked up a spiral ramp and walked out of the Metropolitan Museum's large doors. Before walking back down to the sidewalk, LP's thoughts wandered back to the words George whispered and how they had become part of the scroll. LP had a life-changing moment when whispering those words, connecting with the image that changed how he lived his present-day reality. Since that day, he touched his immortal soul. The question that eluded him, when would he shed his mortal body? He found he could flit in and out the past, present, and the future, and had to work hard to stay at this level of reality. His gift of foresight, coupled with George's whispered words, heightened his extrasensory perception. LP and Ingrid walked down the stairs as bright sunshine beamed down, without a cloud and a blue sky above. LP said, "I'm fading. I think we should go back and rest. You probably need to put your feet up before we take in a show tonight." "Yeah, I agree," she replied. "I need to get off my feet or I won't be walking anywhere else soon." Instead of catching the bus back to their room, they headed over to the nearby subway entrance and went down a steep flight of stairs. Ingrid then joined a queue to buy 2 tokens at a metal caged window. Standing back from the platform edge, they talked about buying tickets for a Broadway show. They decided to see Chicago, just around the corner from where they were staying. They got on the train and got off at the 49th Street station. They headed down 1 block and bought half-price tickets for the show they wanted to see. LP led the way back to their room, as Ingrid struggled with blisters on her feet, wishing she was already there. Back in their room, they watched TV while resting up on their bed. LP breathed a sigh of relief after trying to pack too much in one day. Finally, they could take a breather from doing the tourist thing. His thoughts started to wander. He was not really watching TV, imagining what tomorrow might bring. The next day, LP would deliver the scroll to its destination. Ingrid knew they were not leaving New York until he visited Ground Zero, but she had not been told what LP's intentions were when he got there. Ingrid gave him a shake and said, "We'd better freshen up and get on the move for the 7 o'clock show, or we'll be late." The queue to get into Chicago stretched half a block. The show had been running for 8 years and still drew huge crowds. The show went for 2 hours. During the interval, LP went to the restroom and then came out to stand in another queue to buy a beer and coffee. He was starting to dislike one thing about America. Everywhere they went, they had to wait in a line for food, tickets, transport, everything. He figured if there were no queues, they'd have a lot more time to see New York's famous landmarks. Anyway, after the show, they could say to everyone back home that they had seen a Broadway show. Leaving the theatre, they walked down to Times Square for another look around. LP could now understand why New York was called the city that never sleeps. The sidewalk was crammed with locals and tourists alike, taking in the sights and sounds of New York at night. They left Times Square after LP hailed a taxi. Although it was only a couple of blocks back to their hotel, Ingrid's feet were killing her. The blisters were getting much worse, and she needed to get off her feet, or she'd be going nowhere soon. Back at the room, he cleaned and dressed her blistered toes, hoping she would be up to another big day. Chapter 31. LP was awake for hours before sunrise, unable to sleep, tossing over in his mind all the possibilities that might occur as the day unfolded. He heard a bang outside and was glad it didn't wake Ingrid. He got up and took a couple of steps to their fogged-up window. Rubbing it clear with his hand, he saw a dumpster emptying garbage bins. It looked cold out as a U-Haul van pulled up alongside a no standing sign. A woman stepped from the vehicle wearing gloves and a fleecy padded jacket she quickly zipped up. To keep warm, she rubbed her hands as she went inside the building opposite. A police car pulled up behind her van and an officer proceeded to issue her a ticket. When the woman came back to confront him, they looked like 2 characters in mime. The woman's body language said it all. She was not amused. LP and Ingrid gathered what they could to take with them for the day's outing: camera, iPad, band-aids, tissues, and wallets. Her handbag carried everything a woman would need to go shopping. LP, on the other hand, travelled light, using a small backpack that carried his diary and 2 copies of the scroll, rolled up and sealed in shrink wrap. They walked out into a cold breeze and headed down to the bus stop to wait for the double-decker tourist bus to go north, this time travelling around Central Park and taking in historic landmarks such as St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was an impressive structure reminiscent of Gothic cathedrals from the 13th century. Inside was the largest pipe organ he'd ever seen, and the greatest church he'd walked through in his life. He found it unusual to see was a display inside, denouncing coal seam gas exploration. As he read the 2-page script about what mining companies were doing to good farmland and how farmers had no rights to stop them from exploring and contaminating the land, he thought it was unusual for a church to take a position against mining. LP sympathised with them and asked someone why this was placed inside a church. The older gentleman whispered, "Politics and religion go hand in hand these days." It was more political than religious, LP thought. LP asked another question but got no response. He thought he must have taken a vow of silence. That's all he was going to get out of him. LP caught up with Ingrid, who was admiring the huge stained glass panels that adorned the church. He said, "Come on, are you finished looking around? I don't want to be arriving late at ground zero." Before leaving, LP pushed some change into a donation box and said, "I think this church is getting more paying tourists through its doors than a Sunday service." They walked out the way they had come in, through two giant wooden doors held back with black ropes. They stepped down an expanse of stone steps and waited for their bus to arrive right out front of the cathedral. They didn't have to wait long before their ride to ground zero arrived. Ingrid stepped on first and led the way up the narrow curving metal stairs. Seated on the open deck, the tour guide described New York's landmarks and told the passengers where the rich and famous lived. They reached their destination by 3 o'clock. LP thoughts turned to what he would do when he stood on the ground where the Twin Towers once dominated the skyline. It felt as if the city's heart had been ripped out, and now growing from the old heart were 4 arteries, fueled and powered by the desire for renewal. LP had 2 copies of the scroll printed on canvas, shrink-wrapped and watertight in his backpack. Although he had no idea what to expect at ground zero, he had the premonition that somehow water was involved. Months earlier, he had heard on a radio show that a water feature was being included in the Ground Zero memorial. He had a vision of a high wire barrier and did not expect to be able to access the area. The bus stopped not far from their destination. LP went down the spiral stairs first and then watched Ingrid follow, just in case she missed a step. His fear was unfounded, as they both said, thanks to their driver. Walking down the street past a small old church, they spotted another queue. "Should have expected that," LP said in a dismissive tone. "Everywhere we go involves waiting in a queue." They stood behind 2 young people, and Ingrid asked, "Is this the queue to get to ground zero?" One bloke turned and said yes. The other continued texting on his phone. LP tapped Ingrid on the shoulder and indicated what he thought of this unfriendly chap, sticking 2 fingers behind his head. She grabbed LP's hand and pulled it down, saying, "Don't be a grumpy old man." The queue moved slowly past vendors, selling all sorts of memorabilia of Ground Zero. Ingrid bought a booklet describing the day the towers fell. Its content had disturbing colour pictures, with heart-wrenching eyewitness accounts. 20 minutes passed before they could enter from the sidewalk, and then they went up 5 steps into the building to receive free passes to proceed to where the towers once stood. Before doing that, they walked around the exhibit of photographs taken of that infamous day. Inside a large glass case, a mobile phone played over and over the voice of a distressed mother's last words to her family before it went silent. She knew she was about to die, but her last words were about love and family. Ingrid turned to LP and asked, "Are you all right?" LP wiped his teary eyes and said, "I'm going outside. You get the tickets. I'll meet you out there." She came out a short time later with the tickets, but they would have to return in a half an hour before proceeding to ground zero. She understood why he left the building without her, but thought best to say no more about the exhibit. With some time to spare on their hands, they walked to an old timber church adjacent to where they were standing that had a small graveyard with headstones dating back hundreds of years. Inside was another reminder of what happened on that fateful day in September. LP glanced at his watch and said, "Time to go, or we'll be late." They walked out, leaving behind walls depicting the harrowing and heroic events that unfolded on the day. By 3:30, they returned to Memorial and stood outside with a group of about 30 people. They all headed together down the road, turning left at the first set of lights, and continued 2 blocks. On their way, they passed several construction sites with high chain link fences covered in green matting, blocking the view of what lay behind those barricades. Ingrid inquired, "Are you sure we're heading in the right direction?" To which LP replied, "Let's just follow the crowd and we'll get there." He was of course right. Everyone started turning down a narrow lane and then abruptly stopped. LP commented, "Should have expected this, another bloody queue." They slowly moved forward and entered a security area where bags were being scanned, like at the airport. LP placed his small backpack on the rollers and emptied his pockets, placing the contents in a tray. He had travelled halfway across the world, carrying the scrolls without breaking open the seals. This looked like the final obstacle to overcome before completing his vision of the future that had taken 4 decades to save and deliver the scroll. Again, he was clear to proceed without anyone questioning what may have looked like 2 sticks of dynamite when scanned. If he had been asked to open the shrink-wrapped items, the watertight seals would have to be broken, thereby putting an end to his quest to reach ground zero and deliver the scrolls intact. "Step aside and follow me," a security officer suddenly instructed. LP walked behind a partition and was told to spread his legs and stretch out his arms as a wand was waved over his body. LP thought his worst fears were about to come true. "This is the end," he thought. "You're clean. You haven't any bomb-making residue on you," the security guard said. LP collected his belongings and proceeded to walk out of the building opposite Ground Zero with Ingrid, who had little trouble going through security. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction as they continued to walk along a narrow walkway, turning right into bright sunshine beaming down from a clear blue sky. "We made it, but this is not what I expected to see," LP said. "What did you expect?" she replied. "A lake," said LP. They were now walking towards one of 2 square, inverted waterfalls. 2 bronze plaques, bordering both waterfalls, inscribed the names of all those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks on the 11th of September 2001. The bronze plates reflected sunlight in every direction as the waterfalls cascaded, flowing into a small central square. It looked like a bottomless black hole as water disappeared. It felt like they were on sacred ground as they thought of what once towered out beneath their feet. Ingrid looked at LP as rays of light struck his face and said in a concerned voice, "Put your cap on, or your bald head's going to get sunburnt. Are those 2 moles on your cheek getting larger?" "No, I've had them checked over the past 40 years, since they became rays, starting out as 2 freckles, and they're okay," LP replied. Ingrid pulled out her camera to take a few snaps as LP contemplated what he was going to do next. He believed this place was where the scroll had to be delivered, and it was to float upon water. Reaching into his backpack, he grabbed one of the scrolls and got ready to place it beneath the bronze plate where it could cascade down and disappear into the black hole, but he stopped. Something was not right. He turned to Ingrid and said in a dismissive tone, "Something is out of place. I think the timing is not right. Let's go." As they walked back the way they had come, he stopped to greet a New York police officer standing opposite the first waterfall and said, "Take this. It belongs here." The officer had dark skin and a stocky build. He was leaning up against a metal light pole and didn't understand what LP was saying. Although his strong Australian accent was hard to decipher, the officer stretched out his left hand to take LP's gift. The African-American man nodded in silence as he touched the shrink-wrapped scroll. LP's skin broke out in goosebumps. At that moment, a static electricity grounded through his body, giving both a small electric shock. In a split second, he realised he was still on track and being guided to finish what destiny had in store for him in New York. Across the road was an Irish bar. Surprisingly, it still stood after the Twin Towers fell over 10 years earlier. LP stopped at the menu board outside the pub and said to Ingrid, "Let's get something to eat and have a drink. This is as good a place as any." Ingrid agreed and pushed open the wooden bar door to reveal the full decor of an Irish pub. They pulled up a stool each and sat down at the bar, where they were served by a young lass with an Irish accent. She had the whitest skin he had seen in America. It was radiant, without a blemish, freckle, or makeup. She asked, "What would you have today?" LP ordered a pint of Guinness and a bourbon and cola for Ingrid. They looked around, sensing a lot of pain and sorrow that filled the walls, with badges from all the district fire stations. Lost mates, husbands and wives were honoured and remembered there. Children's photos, sadly, were also displayed. They finished their drinks, and LP said, "We've still got time to see the Statue of Liberty if we hurry." The Staten Island ferry was only a short walk away. It was the best way to get close enough to take photos of the statue, since the old girl was closed to tourists. The fear was it might also get blown up by a crazed terrorist. They kept a steady pace in passing a subway station. As LP commented, "We'll get back to the hotel using this subway after we finish our trip across the bay." Ingrid agreed. "Sooner the better. My feet are killing me." Waiting for the next ferry, they stood shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other sightseers in the ferry terminal. 5 minutes passed before the sound of a foghorn announced the arrival of their ride. Passengers disembarked, and the next group of visitors were waved in by the steward. It would take 30 minutes to dock at Staten Island. There, they would disembark and wait for the next ferry to take them back to the terminal on Manhattan Island. LP positioned himself on the outside deck, with other tourists waiting to take a picture of the Statue of Liberty. He was ready to fulfill his vision of the scroll floating on the water. And that place was now the mouth of the Hudson River, with the icon of New York just across a windy, choppy waterway. He asked Ingrid to take a photo of him holding the most important thing in the world, he thought, wrapped in watertight shrink wrap. LP was now ready to let it slip from his raised right hand, ignoring everyone else around him. With his back to the Statue of Liberty, he smiled and then gently released his grip, allowing the scroll to fall below the bow's weight. Ingrid snapped the picture, thereby ending, she hoped, LP's obsession to deliver the scroll. LP contemplated how the numbers 1 and 0 enabled the scroll to be uploaded to cyberspace for all to download and save. Now Ground Zero would connect with the new Tower 1 in a spectacular way as light reflected off the angled roofline. Beaming bright sunlight would strike hallowed ground on a new Memorial Day. That moment would give reflection on all those who had lost their lives on that day in September. LPs hoped this gift would deliver a message of peace and healing. He thought anyone could connect with the image within the scroll, tapping into universal thought and opening up another level of possibilities to contemplate. Why Ground Zero and the Hudson River was the final destination for the copied scroll was still a mystery to him, but it was finished now. He could get on with his life, and that meant visiting one more landmark tomorrow morning. Before flying out from JFK Airport onto LA and then back home to Australia, they would catch a taxi at 5:30 in the morning and visit the TV studio of NBC's Today Show. Arriving back at the ferry terminal, Ingrid and LP jostled with other passengers to get off first. Their motive was to get on the subway as soon as possible, returning to 49th Street so they could reach their hotel before it got dark. They entered the subway down a steep flight of stairs to a ticket window. LP was thinking. Everywhere they went required a ticket, as Ingrid pushed $10 through the cashier's caged enclosure. They walked through the turnstile after pushing their tickets into the ticket slot. Standing back a couple of paces from the platform edge, they waited for the train. LP was on edge, looking around for anything unusual. He'd seen too many movies that ended badly on subway stations. But his anxiety was unfounded, as the zooming noise of their approaching ride calmed his nerves. Entering through the open carriage doorway, they headed towards 2 empty seats. Although this was their second experience of travelling on a New York subway, it was still eerie. Sitting down, LP glanced around at the other commuters to get a feel of what they were thinking. There was absolute silence. No conversation, no eye contact, only those with heads down, reading or texting. LP made sure not to make direct eye contact with anyone, knowing that it could be construed the wrong way. He figured violence could erupt over the most trivial issue, and the best way to avoid it was to ignore everything around him. It was a primitive response to avoid conflict, but it worked. 20 minutes passed, with the loud clanging of the subway train making its way to each station. More New Yorkers crowded on, and soon the car was standing room only. Considering the peak hour they were travelling in, Ingrid and LP were lucky to get seats. The next stop was 49th Street. They stood up, pushed their way to the centre doors, and waited for the train to come to a screeching halt. The doors opened, and they stepped onto the old subway platform, which needed a good makeover. LP indicated, "Walk this way." They headed for a flight of stairs leading out to the heart of New York. Back in their room, they decided to pack up to be ready for an early start the next morning. They wanted to be outside NBC studio by 6 o'clock and back to the hotel by 8 to be picked up for transit to the airport at 8:15. Their flight was scheduled for 11:30 that morning. Chapter 32. It was still dark outside when LP showered and changed into his new light grey Levi's. He added a long-sleeved Van Heersen striped shirt and pulled on a hooded fleece-lined jacket bought in Vegas. LP called out to Ingrid, "Better rug up, it's going to be cold out there." Ingrid showered and did the usual thing women do before getting dressed, and they left their room by 5:30, requesting a taxi at the front desk. By the time they walked from the foyer onto the sidewalk, their taxi pulled up, with the cabbie inquiring, "Where to, sir?" LP answered, "NBC, mate." As he held open the back door for Ingrid, he slid into the back seat and snuggled up to her, saying, "It's freezing out here." Pulling away from the curb, the driver turned at the lights and took the first right at the next intersection, before the arrow turned red. After driving past Times Square, they were just a short walk away from the TV studios at Rockefeller Center Plaza. Low metal barriers restricted access, with a few station hands milling around. One guy holding a clipboard directed LP and Ingrid around the next corner past a silver food van, where they found, you guessed it, another queue. "That'll be right, another bloody line to stand in the freezing cold," LP quipped sarcastically. They walked to the lineup and edged close to the building to take shelter from the wind. LP expected more people, but when he commented this to the woman in front, she replied, "Wait until 7 when we're herded to the barriers. You'll see the queue stretch beyond the next block." It suddenly dawned on LP that they were at least an hour early. The show was slated to start at 7, not 6 in the morning. Well, the one advantage of reporting early, LP figured, was having the pick of where to stand. Ingrid rubbed her hands, trying to stay warm, while LP walked over to the food van. Complimentary coffee and croissants were available. He joined another queue and received his free coffee and snack. When he returned, Ingrid carefully held her coffee in both hands to warm up. She sipped on her flat black as she slowly stopped shivering, saying, "LP, how did we get the time wrong?" "Don't know, but we'll get the best position right out front of the entrance doors." Sheets of whiteboard were made available to those who wanted to write a message for folks back home. LP took advantage of the extra time before the show started. He went over to the silver van again and asked for a pen and a sheet of whiteboard, after waiting in another queue for the umpteenth time. Around 6:45, the guy with the clipboard called out and waved everyone forward. He directed them to walk up to where the metal barriers were and wait for the show to start. LP and Ingrid positioned themselves right out front of NBC's main entrance glass doors. It was the best position to be noticed. Matt Lauer, the anchorman, came out and greeted his outdoor audience, saying, "How are you all feeling? It's a big show this morning, and even better after seeing so many smiling faces. Welcome." He walked back through the glass door entrance and prepared himself for going on the air. LP positioned his sign with their message for family in Queensland. It read, "Hello Australia. Hi Nate. Be home soon guys. Love you." After waiting for 3/4 of an hour and having the best position to be seen and spoken to, time finally ran out. They had to leave. LP turned around to a young couple Ingrid had been chatting to, then said, "We've got a plane to catch. Take our spot up front." They pushed their way back through the crowded sidewalk and briskly walked back to where they had queued earlier. LP waved his hand to flag a cab. They had little time to spare. If they missed their flight, LP would consider he failed in his mission. Luckily, a cabbie stopped on 49th and 5th Avenue. LP and Ingrid ran over and climbed in the taxi. Time was their biggest enemy now. LP directed, "Hilton Garden Inn, 8th Avenue. Make it snappy, we're running late for our flight at JFK." Their cabbie wasted no time, and they quickly arrived at their hotel. LP opened his wallet to give his cabbie $20, as Ingrid quickly started walking back to their room. LP ran to catch up as the lift doors opened. Thankfully, there were no dramas happening this morning. They entered their room and double-checked that everything was ready to go. There was no time to wait for a bellhop. They started wheeling their luggage out of the doorway and back down to the lift. LP checked out at the reception desk and followed Ingrid, standing in front of the hotel. He placed his hand around her shoulder and said, "Have we got everything?" As their transit van arrived right on time, 8:15 a.m., their driver loaded their luggage in through the rear doors. LP and Ingrid made sure to hold on to their hand luggage when they stepped inside the van. 40 minutes later, they were dropped off in front of the airport terminal. LP was feeling pretty happy with himself. Everything was on schedule. He couldn't spot anything amiss. They stood in line to check in their luggage. As they waited, LP couldn't help eavesdropping on a piece of conversation between one man dressed as a rabbi and another bloke with cufflinks that identified him as a Mason. In a heavy French accent, the Mason asked the rabbi, "What is God? Where is God? And what does God look like?" After a moment's reflection, the rabbi answered, "I can't answer your first questions, but God must have a sense of humour, since we are the chosen people." LP had a quiet chuckle to himself as those two characters sparred off with each other. "Next, move forward," said an unseen voice. Pulling their luggage behind them and stopping at check-in counter number 6, LP lifted Ingrid's bag to be weighed in first, suspecting it might be overweight. The young woman suggested that LP place his bag on as well. Together, their weight turned out to be just correct. The woman said, "Save yourself an excess baggage charge. Just repack your bags so they're equal and underweight." They did as requested and proceeded through security. LP didn't want to say what he saw ahead, but Ingrid did. "Don't get the grumps. More queues ahead." LP just shrugged his shoulders and murmured, "Huh." He looked up at the overhead monitor, showing what flights were boarding. Flight 863 on Delta Airlines was on schedule. They could spot the departure terminal on the left, just a short walk away. LP went ahead and approached the front desk, while Ingrid limped along, nursing her blistered toes. It had been a struggle at times with her feet, but she would soon be able to put them up and rest. LP presented their tickets for seat allocations, but was told to wait until the flight was boarding because they didn't have priority seating and their flight was overbooked. LP turned to Ingrid, who had caught up, and said, "Things are not looking good to get out of New York today." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Don't tell me our flight's cancelled." Ingrid glared at him as her lips tightened. "No, we have to wait, and they'll let us know if we can board. They're overbooked." LP then pointed over to the airport cafe and suggested, "Let's grab something to eat. I'm having a beer to take the edge of things." Ingrid ordered eggs, bacon, and toast to share, a bud for LP and cappuccino for herself. They were seated with a clear view of what was happening with their flight across the walkway. LP walked over and spoke to the airline assistant on several occasions, with no luck. What he found out was there were 7 other passengers before them waiting to board the same flight, chatting about how far they had travelled. Ingrid thought, was he disappointed in not having enough time to visit publishers about his books? Before she could ask, LP said, "Listen, miracles do happen. Final boarding now. Phillips party. Please proceed to boarding terminal 2, a voice bellowed through the airport terminal. LP quickly gulped down the last mouthful of beer and stood up, placing several $1 notes on the table as a tip before reading, "In God we trust," he thought. Right, but everyone else pays cash. They rushed over to the airline assistant, were allotted their seats, and went down the ramp where they entered a now full aircraft, ready for takeoff. They were the last to enter before the captain instructed, "Arm all the doors." By the time they were seated, the engines roared as the aircraft taxied across the runway for takeoff. LP shut his eyes and sunk back into his seat, letting out a huge sigh of relief. He made it with Ingrid in and out of New York over Easter and delivered the scroll, but one word still begged the question, why?